and try to jail heroes like Bernard Goetz who defend themselves. Something is drastically wrong with America.
Welcome to On Second Thought, where William Wagener gives you information that ought to give you second thoughts about the unconstitutional acts of our local, state, and federal government. I am Megan Wells. Now, producer and host of On Second Thought, the good guy in the white hat, William Wagener.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Megan Wells. Beautiful as always. We're here tonight, and I want to introduce you to another American hero besides Bernard Goetz, who defended and used his Second Amendment rights to stop thugs on a New York subway. With me tonight is Cliven Bundy. Welcome, Cliven.
Thank you, thank you.
It's a long way from Bunkerville to California, isn't it?
It is, it's a long trail.
And his attorney, Brett Whipple, is here with us also.
Thank you, William.
Glad to have both of you gentlemen here. I'm taking off my Bundy cowboy hat because we have the real cowboy here. I've been waiting a long time to get you on this set because I don't think my audience, which is people who are slowly waking up that something's not right in America, they're not sure exactly who's at fault, but they sense this isn't America that we thought of as America back in the 50s, in the 40s. It's a different country. It's becoming more like Nazi Germany, when people can steal your land, point guns at you. If you didn't catch my last show, I made this analogy. Even the Nazis didn't steal people's private land unless you were Jewish. And what's happening in America is they're treating everybody like a disenfranchised Jew. Cliven Bundy comes from Bunkerville, Nevada, which is just north of Las Vegas. Cliven, when did your family go there? How long have you had your established rights?
Well, my preemptive rights were created by pioneers that came into southern Nevada area along the Virgin River, and they first come there in 1877. There were no roads or trails through that country except the Spanish Trail went through there, but my ancestors were the first ones to come there. They created the roads, developed the land, and there's where my preemptive rights started. And I've been there ever since, several generations of family. I'm making beneficial use of that land and continuous use up till today.
You're still using it?
I'm still using it.
In spite of the Bureau of Land Management thugs that came with guns and killed your cattle?
Yes, I'm still using it. I'm still making beneficial use. And you might ask, well, what do you do, Bundy? Well, I harvest the natural resource from the land and create beef, and a commodity that man can eat. Beef's good. Beef's what we have for dinner.
Where's the meat?
Where's the meat?
Where's the beef? So you also grow melons, and you have 160 acres that you privately own, correct?
Yes.
And that's free and clear. You don't owe any bank any money. They have no right to take that land from you.
That's right.
But beyond that, out on the, gosh, it's awful hot there, Cliven. It gets to be 105. How do you stand it?
Hey, those melons grow good at 105.
I bet they do.
Even at 115. My ranch, my 160 acres that's private property, are in the center of the ranch. Mm-hmm. And I graze cattle in all directions. And so my ranch, we raise melons. We say what we do is we raise melons, cattle, and kids. And that's the truth, and that's what we do. The farm is basically in the center of the ranch, and what the farm is for is mainly to sustain the ranch. That's where we have our saddle horses. That's where we raise our hay to feed our weaner calves. And when we bring our cattle in for, say, wean the calves and harvest the calves, we feed them there on the farm. And so the farm is a basic center of the ranch.
But you need all this other public land for grazing, and you've established your grazing rights since 1877 or thereabouts?
Yes. You know, to give a little history on America, in the east, along the east coast, where, you know, the original settlers settled, they used to say 40 acres and a good mule was all they needed. And that would sustain a family. And when they come further west, it took 160 acres to sustain a family. And when you come further west, it took 640 acres or 320 acres or, you know, to sustain a family. But when you get to the arid Southwest, it takes thousands of acres, even hundreds of sections to sustain a family. And so that's what happened with my family. They came, and of course the first thing, let's stop and think of how they came here. There weren't no roads or trails, and they had a horse and wagon, and they might, with everything they owned in the wagon, they might have had a milk cow tied to the back of their wagon. So their whole family, everything they owned, was working their way west. When they come to sort of a place like along the river or a place that was a spring, remember it's just arid desert, well, they stopped. And when they pulled their horse, pulled their horse up to stop, the question is, what did they need? What was the first thing they needed?
Probably water.
The water, for what?
For the cattle, for themselves, for everything.
For the horse. He's the one that's been doing the work here. And so they unbuckled the horse and took him up to a spring or a little creek or something. And when he took his first sip of water, he made beneficial use of a renewable resource. And that was where my first rights began, is when that pioneer's horse took the first sip of water. He started to create beneficial use of the new renewable resource, and that's how Nevada law is based. So the first come, first serve, and Nevada law says the first man to use that water has the right. And my ancestors created those rights in that way. Now, what was the second thing the horse needed?
Probably something to eat.
Yeah, they didn't have a bale of hay or a sack of grain, and so they took the horse over to the hill or whatever and let him start to eat. As soon as he took his first bite of grass, he started to make beneficial use of that resource. And again, that's where my rights began.
Your father's name was what?
My father was Dave Bundy.
And he was on the same ranch doing the same grazing?
That's right.
And his father's name was what?
Well, we got to jump to my mother's side of the family.
Okay, your mother's side.
Yeah. And my dad was Dave Bundy. He was raised on the Arizona Strip, which is over the mountain from the Virgin Valley, the Bunkerville area where I live.
Okay.
Of course, he met my mother, and he come over the hill.
That's a good reason to come over the hill.
But even his ancestors came to the Virgin Valley area in the 1800s, and then they migrated and went into the Arizona Strip, and they basically raised my dad there. But on my mother's side, it goes back about 5 generations. It goes back to my mother, which was Bodell Jensen. Johnny Jensen was her father, and his dad was Nephi Johnson. And Nephi Johnson was a pioneer that developed, or actually discovered, like Zion's Park area.
Oh.
He was also an Indian interpretator. He did the interpretation for the Indian and the white man. And so his name was Johnson. My grandfather's name was Jensen, but he raised my grandfather from 2 years old, and so that's how the name difference were.
Wow.
Because my great-grandfather died of exposed to the weather in Utah, and died from early life.
That's pretty rugged territory out there.
It was. Now, my grandfather married Abbott, and then he married the oldest daughter, my great-great-grandfather. He married the oldest daughter of Dudley Levitt, which is another great pioneer. And they were the first ones to come to that area in 1877.
Wow, I think Gloria Navarro's ancestor came from Cuba 45, 50 years ago. She ain't been around as long as your people have. It's just saying, some inequity there, that the newcomers put the old-timers that have been here for generations on trial. Essentially, your crime, as they saw it, was raising food, growing cattle and melons.
Well, what they're saying is they're saying that I'm trespassing on federal land.
When did that start? Was about 1980?
No, you know, the federal land deal basically, yeah, really.
When they started making an issue.
In the 1980s and by 1992, they were making a big issue of this. we got to go back to 1934 at the Taylor Grazing Act, and we got to understand what was happening there.
The Taylor Grazing
The
Act.
Act of 1934.
That's a state act or a federal act?
Federal Act.
Federal Act.
Yeah.
Taylor Grazing Act.
Act of 1934.
Okay.
So let's go back to the days of 1934. All of the western, let's say the western states, 11 western states, let's call them 11 western states. All of these states were beneficial use made of vast amount of land, was all grazing, either sheep or cattle were all over this land. And so ranchers had created sort of stewardship over all of this land, but there was problems, there was range wars. And what was happening is there's no boundaries. One rancher overstepped one other rancher, another rancher overstepped on like the cattle issue.
Yeah.
Then you had a herd of sheep come across the middle of them. And so there was a problem. The ranchers...
Sheep herders weren't really welcome.
No, because they, like I said, these ranchers the cattle ranchers thought they had a right established, and then their neighbors was trespassing, and the sheep was overgrazing them, and so it was called range war.
Yeah.
And so this wasn't just a Nevada problem or a California problem. This is a Western United States problem. And so in order to try to solve this problem, the rancher allowed the federal government to get involved. And that's where the federal government first got involved with these western lands. And when that happened, the federal government that was when they created the Taylor Grazing Act. And the Taylor Grazing Act didn't say the federal government was going to be the ruler, the judge. They were going to be the monitor of a program to try to figure out how to adjudicate these ranches.
And they have permanent boundaries.
Yeah, boundaries.
That
and
didn't
so
shift.
and so what the Taylor Grazing Act said is that they would monitor the program, they would survey the lines, and they would keep the records. That was what they were supposed to do. And what was the rancher supposed to do? He was supposed to pay them for that service. That's where the grazing fees start. So the grazing fee has nothing to do with grass or land rental or anything. It has to do with a service.
Service of monitoring the boundary.
And surveying it.
Surveying it.
And keeping records of it.
Keeping records. And does the BLM today keep records of those boundaries?
I'm sure they do. They've got a record. Now they say you put a boundary line here and a boundary line here, and let's say Bundy owns the grazing rights and water rights in that boundary. That's what they call adjudicated rights.
Okay.
So I have adjudicated rights. I'm the steward over that. I do not own that land, and I can't tell the public what to do with it. But I have rights on that land, and them rights have been created through preemptive rights created through beneficial use, going back to the first settlers that came to the valley. And them are the rights that I'm fighting for. Them are the rights that I'm trying to protect. And what the government is saying is, that's our land, we own that land, and you don't have no rights, and we got an army to prove that.
Well, yeah, they tried to prove it, didn't they?
Yeah, they did try to prove it.
It literally came down to guys carrying guns, and they came like they were going to Iraq for war. Those guys had full gear. There's a shot of your Bundy defenders. Some of them are walking, some of them are on horseback. I don't see any of them waving guns in the air.
Well, if you take close shots, you'll find a few people that are armed, but very few. But you'll never find any of them pointing guns at anybody.
Yeah, that's.
But that's
But the BLM was pointing guns at you.
Well, I'd like you to put up a shot of that of what.
If we BLM pointing the guns.
Now this is the one. These are we the people. Let's see what the feds are doing.
All these years, you've been grazing. You've been raising cattle, producing food, and now the feds want to say you get off that land. It isn't your land. And I think they had a slogan posted in the BLM office, "Moo free in '93" or something like that.
No more moo in '92, cattle free by '93 was their model.
That shows an attitude, doesn't it?
Now
those guys look like they got some heavy armor on, and they got some heavy guns.
Yeah, and see if he could pull up another one where they're actually pointing them. They're pointing those guns, but they were 200 of those people, armed agents, pointing guns at we the people.
Did any of those shots get into the court record, Mr. Whipple?
Yes, it did.
Could you get me some of those shots that got on the court record?
I'm sure I can.
I wish we had them.
I think some of those that are on the screen are some of those that were utilized at the trial.
But the one with, 150 armed BLM agents, did you have any shots like that got into the court record?
There were a lot of pictures. There's some of those, they certainly allowed, there were 3 different trials, so we never even got that far in our trial. But in the first 2 trials, there were clearly pictures of the BLM and the federal agents holding weapons. We used them in our opening presentation.
Were you the lawyer for Cliven on all 3 trials?
No, in fact.
Just the last trial?
The reason they had 3 trials is there were so many defendants, they couldn't have put us all in the same courtroom. So they broke it into 3 different groups. And Cliven and his 2 sons and 1 other individual were in the group that I was involved with. But I represented Cliven in his case.
By the way, Attorney Whipple here, on the other side of Cliven from me, he played football here for Hancock College. What year was that?
Coach King and Coach Mankins, 1982 and 1983.
82 and 83. I don't know if there's any fans out there, but
yeah,
he was playing football here. He wasn't a lawyer then.
No, it's a great town. Always want to come back.
What was more fun, playing football or being a lawyer?
I tell you, the Bundy trial was a good time. We had, Cliven's got a great family, and it was great to be part of that. So I enjoyed both of them.
Very good. So, Cliven, back to you. So, somewhere in the 1980s, what happened? Somebody send you a letter in the mail and say, hey, you can't graze here anymore?
Well,
Did they send the sheriff knocking on your door saying, hey?
No. What we was doing is we was actually signing grazing permits, and called BLM grazing permits. And we had been signing those things for, say, 40 years, or I don't know, maybe at that time might be only 30 years or so. And so what happens is they were supposed to, they become managers. And let me go into that just a little bit. Remember I said they were supposed to be monitors of the system?
Monitors of the boundary lines. And
I want to explain to the people a little bit about this.
Please do.
This adjudication thing. They were grazing boards established. And what the grazing boards were ranchers that were nominated and elected to be on these boards. And so the livestock people, or let's just call them ranchers, the ranchers actually were the judge of where these lines were going to be. Remember, the government's only just monitoring them. The judges were actually we the people, or we the rancher.
Okay, I got it.
And so when they decided where Bundy's line was here and where Bundy's line was here, then Bundy became the steward of that area. And that was put in the records. That was part of BLM's job, to keep records on them. Okay. Now, we paid the government for their service. We paid, just for example, we paid 6 cents AUM. AUM is an animal unit per month. That's basically how much it costs to feed one animal or have it on a piece of property or whatever for 1 month. But it wasn't nothing to do with feed or property. It was really to do with service. So we paid the government 6 cents per AUM. That means for one cow, every month the cow was out there on that land, we paid the government 6 cents. Well, now after these lines were decided and it was mapped and they have records of it, well, now we need fences. So we need a fence here and a fence here to fence Bundy's property away from somebody else's property. And so instead of getting rid of the government, that's when the ranchers should have fired the government, got rid of them. They kept dealing with them. And so now what the government is doing is they're not only monitoring now, they're basically getting involved in range improvements, we call it. So now what the rancher's doing is he's still contracting for this range improvements, and they're paying the rancher's fees went up from 6 cents now to $1 Well, when it gets to $1, the federal government is only supposed to get 12.5% of that, or 12.5 cents per AUM. What is that 12.5 cents for? It's for service.
Servicing. Where did the rest of the money go?
The rest of it is supposed to be sort of banked and come back on the land as range improvements, like the fences, the water, and like a pond, or even a road improvement, corrals. It's supposed to come back. So now the rancher, who's paying the bill? The rancher is. He's paying 12.5% of his dollar for BLM service, and the other 70 or 87.5 cents is coming back on the ranch, on the land for range improvement. But the rancher's still signing the bottom of a contract. And what happens is now we've got to the point that we're calling it BLM, Bureau of Land Management. Well, now the government says we're the managers. It wasn't very long until the government says we're the stewards. And it wasn't very long after that they're saying we're the owner of the land.
So they went from stewards in the 60s or 70s?
Yes.
To then they said they're the owners in the 80s.
In the 80s and 90s, and then they basically said they're making all the terms and conditions. When you sign a contract, there's always terms and conditions. Well, the terms and conditions got to where, remember who signed the contract? The rancher's signing the contract.
Yeah.
And what he's doing is he's basically signing the state's rights away, the county's rights away, the sheriff's policing power away, and the rancher's doing this, and he's still doing it today. But in the early 90s, the BLM started doing their management. They started to manage for turtles and endangered species and multiple uses other than ranching. And basically, now ranching's not important. And another thing that happened, remember who was paying the BLM's wages? The rancher was. Now they passed the law, which is called FLPMA, which is...
Called what?
FLPMA, what is it?
FLMPA.
Yeah, and what?
Federal Land Management Practice Act.
Yeah.
When did they pass that, Mr. Whipple?
76 or
That's
something
correct.
like that.
That came in after the Taylor.
Well, where
Grazing
were they
Act.
when they were doing nuclear test bombing, test nuclear weapons out there in Nevada land? Where was all their concern for the endangered species then?
Well, that was about 100 miles further west from where we were.
But doesn't the radioactivity come down and affect the same turtles?
Yeah, absolutely. It affects the people too. There's a long story with regard to that.
Yeah, that's another story. But okay, so what happened to your boards after '73? And what happened to your local boards made up of ranchers?
Well, there were a time, and I probably still, my name's still on there. I was elected, I was on one of those boards back in the 90s, early 90s. But what happened is basically the boards didn't matter anymore, because what it was doing is now on FLPMA, they started to get their money from the general funds of the United States. So the rancher wasn't important no more because they could get more money from the general fund. And what they did is, back in the Taylor grazing time, my district, or the area where we ranched, there was like 2 people involved in Taylor grazing. There was 1 man and a secretary. Now, when we get to the FLPMA time, where they're picking up federal money to fund themselves, there are hundreds of them. In other words, bureaucracy grew from 2 to, say, 100. Well, the ranchers definitely couldn't pay for their wages, and so we become where we're not important. And of course, they started to manage for the endangered species and all these type of things. And so let's say go back to the...
Who was that guy on the screen we just saw? Was that Thug in Chief?
Yeah, that was interesting. That is BLM's
Daniel P. Love.
And
Who had no love for any of you guys, I think. It was pretty ugly what was going on there. Daniel P. Love, now, he was doing such a good job with his hat turned around backwards there, looking like a street thug. He's got his sunshades on. Who's he talking to? Is he talking to your son Ammon right there?
Yeah, Brett might express what's going on here.
What's happening there, Brett?
Well, that's the negotiations that were taking place under the freeway right at the time of the standoff.
Under I-15.
Yes.
Right by the Bunkerville turnoff.
Yep. And it was Cliven's boys that were there talking to him.
Yeah, trying to reason with him. And what was his attitude? Get the heck out of here, we're in charge?
Well, Mr. Love, honestly, it blew the whole thing up out of the water. I mean, at the end of the day, we were able to depose him prior to the trial, and part of the information we gathered during that deposition is what ultimately led to this case being reversed. After the Bundy standoff, he went up to the Burning Man. He got in trouble at Burning Man because he was involved with inappropriate and immoral activity up there.
Yeah, we don't need to go into detail.
Ended up losing his job. Then it turned out that he actually utilized evidence and handed out evidence that was confiscated in another case as tokens to some of to his friends. So once they realized that he had breached issues of security and issues of chain of command, he's in a bad situation right now. But clearly, he was the wrong man for the job.
Why isn't Prosecutor Stephen Maurer going after him for those bad acts?
Oh, I suspect the day will come that there will be an issue with Mr. Love. I'm sure he's now represented by attorneys and he's not talking to anybody.
That's why I can't get him to answer the phone.
Yep. I can promise you, you'll never get him on this show. Yeah, there's a lot of unanswered questions with Mr. Love.
Well, I'd like to extend an invitation to you, Daniel P. Love. I got a few questions to ask you. And you don't have to be next to Mr. Bundy, but I got a few questions. And also to you, still a judge, Gloria Navarro. Navarro. Yep. I comically called her Navarro in her kangaroo court because the proceedings I saw, from what I could tell from the feedback, is she was running that like this trial is going to go only this way, and the prosecutors are going to win, and we don't want to hear these witnesses or anything that's going to stop that process. But it happened anyway, didn't it, Mr.
Well, in our case, she did the right thing. She's, at the end of the day, she's the judge who dismissed it against Mr. Bundy.
With prejudice.
With prejudice, absolutely. And she ruled against the U.S. Attorney's Office. I can promise you the U.S. Attorney's Office are not happy with Judge Navarro because she's the one that turned it on its heels and she's the one that dismissed it. There were 2 prior trials leading up to us, and I know there are a lot of allegations and concerns, but in our trial, she did the right thing, and the right thing happened.
But in the prior 2 trials, she didn't do quite the right thing, Cliven, right?
Well, you know, I was in those days in jail, so I didn't.
You didn't get to see all those.
To see all of that. I hear a few rumors that things were going bad in them courts.
So the boards that you guys had became dormant. Federal funding took over, became all important, and now they just claim this isn't public land, this isn't rancher stewarded land, this is federal land.
That's right.
That's their attitude.
That's their attitude, and so now what they're doing is, I'd say they're administrative regulating the rancher out of business. It wasn't just Bundy. It was all of the ranchers across the western United States.
Can you name a couple of those 52 other ranchers? Do you remember?
Well, any? Yeah. In fact, in this book, it's quite interesting. Right on the first.
This book by Stickler.
Right there's a few of the names of the ranchers. They basically was involved with the industry.
In this book by Michael Stickler on page, right after page, well, it's near the beginning anyway, before page, it's page Roman numeral 5, Dick Reed, Arthur Hughes, Mr. Free, Jack Hardy, Kent Hardy, Charles Hardy, Abe Tierlink, Carl Wyko, Francis Meyer, Mr. Langley, Jim Whitmore, Denny's Whitmore, Raleigh Espin, Hank, all these people. This is just some of them. It ends with Elmer Levitt, Loudy Levitt, Archie Hughes. Wow, there's a lot of people. They're not all Bundys. There's a few Jensens. There's Johnny Jensen, Melber Jensen, Kelly Jensen, Omer Jensen, Andrew Jensen, Jeff Jensen, Richard Jensen. Some of those are your cousins?
Yep.
Cousins?
Grandpas and uncles.
Donnie Hughes, Chuck Simmons.
These were all ranchers in my area that
all forced off their land.
Well, it was basically this movement the government made basically ruined their livelihood on this land. They was all involved in livestock industry.
That's the book by Michael Stickler. And Michael Stickler learned some of this while he was in jail with you?
Yes, he spent about two months in jail in the same pod or area.
And what was he in jail for?
Well, it was, I'm not exactly
Nothing
sure.
to do with the Bundy
No, nothing to
standoff.
do with the Bundy story. It was something to do with the money, supposedly some kind of money fraud thing or something like that. And so I don't know what it was really all about.
Well, he made good time. He made good use of
Yeah,
his time with you, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, and he
Thank you, Mr. Stickler.
yeah.
So, the boards that you used to have that adjudicated these lands and that the BLM enforced and kept the boundaries straight, now it's just the BLM claims it's our land, we can take it, we can do what we want. Did you see any evidence that after these guys lost their ranches, Senator Harry Reid bought up those parcels, turned them into LLCs, and sold them to somebody else?
Well, you know, I don't know really how much of that's true. Now, let me tell you. There are a lot of rumors about, you know, solar systems and uranium and even oil, and they're saying it's on Bundy Ranch. But I'll tell you what I know. Say the solar system, that's true, but they didn't need the land for the solar system. They needed Bundy Ranch for the mitigation. And this is all a bunch of environmental wacko stuff. But what they did is if say they needed 10,000 acres for a solar system put out on the desert.
Right.
Well, they have this endangered species, say the desert tortoise. So they've got to replace the desert tortoise's habitat with something in order to get the 10,000 acres. So they used Bundy's Ranch to say, that's the mitigation. We're going to put the tortoises, or at least protect the habitat over here, and let say China put their solar system over here, and we're going to protect the tortoise habitat.
Right.
Well, what they're saying is tortoises and cows can't be on the same land, so we've got to get rid of the cows. And where Harry Reid comes into this is in the environmental community is paying Harry Reid a whole bunch of money, maybe millions of dollars. How it's done, I'm not to say, but Harry Reid's getting a whole bunch of money in order to clear the land for the solar system. And that's how Harry's got all of his money over the years, is these environmental.
So these contractors that are expanding North Las Vegas, is it?
That's part of it.
They expand and they displace the tortoises, so now they want to steal your land and say this is the tortoise mitigation land.
Yeah, and trade it. Yeah, trade that.
And trade the land, but you lose your whole family operation that's been going for 3-4 generations or more.
That's true, and they don't really protect the tortoise. What they do is they give, U.S. Fish and Wildlife will give, say, North Las Vegas a Section 10 permit. A Section 10 permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife means that you can take the tortoise. Well, what does that mean? That means you can kill the tortoise and make your land improvement. But you got to protect some habitat for the tortoise over on Bundy's ranch. And they also, in this process, it gets quite complicated. They made a tortoise reserve in Las Vegas, outside of Las Vegas. And there they gathered the tortoise off this land that was going to be in development, put them on in that Tanshan sanctuary reserve, and then they ended up killing all them tortoises.
Yeah, they started euthanizing this tortoise because they were doing too well.
Yeah, and
what kind of craziness is this, people?
And see, in Bundy, he you know, there's articles in the newspaper where Bundy said he's concerned about these tortoises' lives. He wants to protect them, and he'd welcome them to come out and be put on his Bundy Ranch. And you know, that's their habitat. They're supposed to be supreme habitat. Bring those turtles out here and let them graze with my cattle. But no, instead of that, they wanted to kill the tortoises, and they wanted to get rid of my cattle, and so they brought their army.
And his crime was raising cattle so people would have steaks and hamburgers. That's his crime, people. Only in America, only in Obama's America, and George Bush's America, and Clinton's America. I think Trump is less excited about the BLM's. Let me just ask you, yes or no, Cliven, would it be a good thing if Trump, by executive order, just said, no more BLM, it will no longer exist. We're abolishing it. None of them have jobs, their pensions are gone. Goodbye. Would that be, yes or no, a good thing?
Well, yes, it'd be a good thing.
What do you think, Mr. Whipple?
It'll make a lot of ranchers happy, I promise you that.
Would it hurt me in Santa Maria if all the BLM suddenly didn't exist? I don't think it would hurt me a bit. I wouldn't miss a one of them. I don't know very many of them. And the few I know, I don't like. I wouldn't miss them.
You know, there's a sort of a constitutional question here that, you know, I've dealt with. You know, those people that work for BLM and say Park Service and other government agency, you know, they have a constitutional right to have their life, liberty, and property protected. Okay, so you've got a BLM employee that he's making a car payment and a house payment, and you'd say, well, we can't ruin his lifestyle. We got to protect it. You know, and I have some sympathy for that. But let me tell you something. I've worked construction. I've been a rancher, and I've been around a lot of people. And when we get through with a job, you know what happens? We get fired or laid off, and we go find another job. It's time to fire them and lay them off and let them go get another job. It's time.
You heard it, Cliven Bundy. Fire the BLM, President Trump. Let them go find another job. I hear McDonald's is hiring, Walmart is hiring. Let them go get another job and another pension. I think the disservice, you know, I used to think of the BLM, the National Park Service, as Smokey the Bear with his ranger hat and ready to help you find a camping place. Now I think of them as thugs with guns, pointing guns at ranchers trying to grow food.
And that's exactly, you know, I'd say they should be like the Boy Scouts. They should be helping the little old lady across the street. That's supposed to be a service to the American people. It's not a service when you point your guns down American people.
Yeah.
And American people are not going to put up with them pointing their guns down our throat anymore. We're not going to do that anymore. The federal government is not going to point their guns down our throat anymore. And they have lit their last fire. They just won't get around to understanding that. They have lit their last fire.
Yeah, we need to let that fire burn up the BLM and destroy them. They need to be eradicated. A Boy Scout is supposed to be trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent towards God. What I saw, and I wasn't there, but Cliven was there, what I saw was the opposite. They weren't trustworthy. Daniel Love said they weren't killing cattle, and were they killing your cattle?
Yes, they were.
Yes, they were. So he lied. Daniel Love plain out lied. He said, we're not killing your cattle. He was killing the cattle. So they're not trustworthy. They're not loyal to the Constitution. Bundy's more loyal to the Constitution. You know, they weren't helping little old ladies across the street. I think it was your sister. They grabbed her and threw her to the pavement there. Was that your sister?
Yes, it was.
They threw her to the pavement. That's not helping a little old lady cross the rangeland. That's throwing her to the pavement. And she was just trying to see, I think, if they were carrying out your dead cattle. I want to thank you for giving us the grand picture here. So come down the road. Now it's sometime in 2010, 2011. Are you having to go to court and deal with them in court?
Well, let's go back to 1998.
Okay.
The federal government basically come with a lawsuit. Now remember, in 1998, my 52 neighbors are already gone, and Bundy has basically said, I have preemptive rights created here and I'm not leaving. And I said no, and then I finally said, hell no, I'm not leaving. I've got rights created here and I'm not wanting to give them up. Well, at that time, I wasn't sure whether I was right or wrong. But as I went on and understood the Constitution, studied the Constitution, figured this out, I found out Bundy was right. The federal government don't own this land. The federal government has no rights here. And of course, the federal government says, you're trespassing on our land. And they brought a court action against me. And they did get a judgment against me, and people need to understand.
Who was your attorney at that time?
I was doing my own work. So I didn't have an attorney.
Didn't have an attorney?
No, I didn't. And
Was that a mistake, Mr. Whipple? Or would it make no difference?
It was an uphill battle for Mr. Bundy in that civil matter. At the end of the day, I think he did as well as he could, or anybody could have.
So even if he had an attorney, they were going to railroad this thing through.
In federal court, they would have, sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
So even if you'd hired an attorney, it wouldn't have made any difference. They had what I call Agenda 21, which you can look it up. They're trying to drive everybody into the West Coast, where you are right now on the coast of the Pacific, or into big cities like Salt Lake, and get everybody off the land everywhere. And they want to drive the ranchers out of business. I think this is now the unwritten goal of the feds, and it's not a constitutional goal. I think you're absolutely right.
You know, this is interesting. You brought this forward. Just last week, Secretary, we've got to get the right Zinkler. Oh,
Zinkler.
Yes, that's right.
Secretary Zinkler came to Salt Lake this last week. And what I want to tell you here is he talked about reducing the monuments, which sounded good, you know, going to basically turn back like a couple of million acres of land back to public use and taking it out of the monuments. But then he also said, for the environmental, he said, we're going to bring our agents together, like BLM, Park Service, different agencies together. And what we're going to do now is we're going to create a corridor for the wildlife. And when he said corridor, you know what that means?
Yeah.
That means it's Agenda 21.
Agenda
So
21
we
again.
got our Secretary of Interior now saying that he's going to create a corridor for these wildlife. And that corridor is going from like Mexico through the United States up into Canada, and that's a Agenda 21 agenda.
Yeah, sounds like it to me, Cliven.
Well, sure it is.
I wonder if President Trump even heard his speech.
Well, I don't know whether he did or not, but now we have Trump's administration promoting Agenda 21.
I hope that's not so.
I am too.
I hope that's not so. So moving up, we get, you got this lawsuit, they find against you. What judge was that ruled against you back in '98?
Well, it was Honorable Lloyd George.
Not that dishonorable stinker, Lord George, that crucified Irwin Schiff.
Yeah, the same.
The one and same criminal that should be indicted.
But let me tell you something about this federal judges. In Article
Don't I have a unique way of praising federal judges, Mr.
Yeah, that's a little unique. I'll give you that.
in Article 3 of the Constitution, it talks about the judicial powers the United States has. And it talks about Congress has power to appoint judges. And they have power to appoint judges basically for a lifetime. Most people thinks it's for a lifetime appointment. And they pay them money.
Provided they give good services.
Okay, no, it's not good service, providing they act in good behavior.
Yeah, they have to have good behavior.
Okay, so what does good behavior mean? Good behavior means in accordance to the Constitution of the United States. That's why they're a judge, a federal judge, is to administer
the Constitution.
The Constitution. They swear to an oath. And when they don't administer the Constitution and don't uphold and sustain the Constitution, they're in bad behavior. Now let's talk about Lloyd George.
Wait a minute. Mr. Woodward, do you agree with that, how he defined it?
Well, at the end of the day, this is what we're all following, right? That's why
Right.
we're here.
So Cliven's right.
Cliven is a student of the Constitution, and I
Right.
have great respect for him. Multiple people have multiple interpretations, but I follow my client's direction, and at the end of the day, it turned out to be the best direction.
There you go.
Okay.
You're backed up by your attorney.
Okay, good, thank you. But I want to go on to Honorable Lloyd George now, and he
Why do
made.
you call him honorable?
He's
so
okay. Let me tell you
Okay,
why
go
I call
ahead.
him. Let me
Go
tell you
ahead.
why I call him honorable. I believe that Lloyd George has been appointed by Congress to be a federal judge. And I believe that he has constitutional jurisdiction and authority to be a federal judge. So I honor that. Okay.
All right.
Now, I want to talk to you about his court order. So what they've done now is they've said I'm trespassing on federal land. Cliven Bundy is grazing his cattle on their land, and they're going to trespass me for it. Cliven Bundy said, no, I'm not grazing your cattle on your land. I'm grazing my cattle on Clark County, Nevada land only. Okay, it's not federal land, it's Clark County, Nevada land. The court's saying you're grazing it on federal land. So I go back to the Constitution, and where does the federal government, where does it in the Constitution, does it say the federal government can own land?
I never saw it in there.
No, you never saw it in there because it's not in here.
Except for the 10 square miles they call Washington,
Okay.
D.C.
And that is a
And federal military.
yeah, and that's Article 1, 8, and 17 of the Constitution.
Got
In
it.
Article 1, 8, and 17 of the Constitution, it allows the federal government to own 10 square miles for Washington, D.C., and it also says that they can have other lands. Well, what other lands? 10 square miles that's for the capital of the
country.
Of the country, and it says they can have other land. Okay, what other land can they have? They could have land, let's say in Nevada, other land in Nevada, if they go to the Nevada State Legislature and they approve of a sale of land, and then it has to be for a certain purpose. It has to be for basically military or other buildings, which would be post offices and courthouses. And so there's a couple of interesting questions. If the federal government owns all this land, why would they need to come to the state of Nevada and buy land? I'd like to ask my attorney, why would the federal government
Put on the spot here.
Why would the federal government need to buy land from the state of Nevada if they own all of it? They claim they own 87% of the state of Nevada. So why would they need to buy land from the state of Nevada?
And what specifically are they buying? Which land?
Well, they're buying the public land of the state of Nevada.
Well, there's a reason that we're here, and the reason for that is because Mr. Bundy has stood up for the state of Nevada. There's a lot of folks, and it includes the Nevada governor and the Nevada legislature, that believes that this land was destined to be turned over to the state of Nevada and should be turned over to the state of Nevada. It just never got turned over to the state of Nevada. And so that's why Mr. Bundy is actually taken a leading position in the fact that the federal government never followed through with the earlier promises that it would be the citizens of the state of Nevada that would have that title. And so it's just a matter of time. And I think there's a lot of people that really, in addition to our governor and our legislature, that feel the same way. We had a huge fight with the federal government when they came out there and tried to put in the Yucca Mountain test site, or the waste dump there. And,
How well did that go over with the Nevada people?
That did not go over well. And in fact, at the end of the day, that's why we're here, is because we believe these are Nevada issues that should be resolved by Nevadans, not by the federal government.
Now, let me make a little bit of change here. Bundy believes that the land of the state of Nevada was disposed of by Congress in 1864. So I don't believe the government has anything to do with this land. The federal government has nothing to do with this federal land. It's not federal land, it's state land. It was disposed of. Look in the Constitution in Article 4 and 2 and 3 of Article 4 and see what it says there.
The Article 4. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects shall...
No, we got to go to 2 and 3.
Or you want to go back to Amendment 2 and 3?
No, not an amendment, article.
Oh, article. Actually, I was looking at your amendment here. You had it underlined, number 10.
Yeah, let's go back to Article...
The power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. I think that's where you're standing, but you want me to look back here at Article...
Yeah, I want you to go back to Article 4 now.
Okay, Article 4.
And then verse 2 and down 3.
Okay, there's Article 4, verse 2 and 3. Okay, Article 4, Section 2, the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens of the several states. A person charged in any state with treason, felony, or other crime who shall flee from justice and be found in another state shall on demand of the executive authority of the state from which he fled be delivered up to be removed to the state having jurisdiction of the crime. No person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping to another, shall in consequence or any law or regulation therein be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up upon claim to the party to whom the service or labor may be due. Section 3 says...
Okay, let's go, skip down to the second...
Congress shall have the power to dispose of and
right
make
there.
all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States, and nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to prejudice any claims of the United States or of any particular state.
Okay, now...
You couldn't get that in Gloria's court record, could you?
Actually, Cliven's son did an excellent job.
Ryan did it, huh?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I tell you what, the jurors loved it. They really did. He was able to cross-examine the attorney in the civil matter about these very issues. At the end of the day, the jurors, I think, really appreciated the insight. And I feel had we gone to an actual verdict, it would have been easily not guilty across the board as well.
Now, what I want to point out here in Article 4, Section 3 and verse 2, is Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations. Most people forget that Congress has power to dispose of.
Right.
What are they disposing of? Well, they're disposing of the territory, and they're making a state. When they dispose
Makes
of it,
sense.
they make a state. And so when they made the state of Nevada, what did Congress do? They lost their congressional power because they disposed of the land. So they have no power left because they disposed of it. So we don't need to have the United States give back our land. We need to act like we own the land and have the land. In 1864, it was disposed of. Congress lost their constitutional jurisdiction and authority over making rules and regulations. They'd already disposed of it. And so let's get back to the other property. Well, what is other property are they talking about here? Well, the other property was Article 1, 8 and 17 property. That's the only property they could have. So let's go back to Article 1, 8 and 17.
Article 1, 8, and 17. Okay, under Section 8, here you have highlined on page 7, to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district, not exceeding 10 square miles, as may be cession of particular states, and the acceptance of Congress becomes the seat of the government of the United States, and to exercise like authority over all places purchases by the consent of the legislature,
The state legislature.
of the state, in which the same shall be for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, stockyards, and other needful buildings.
Okay, so
That sounds military to me.
yeah, so you can understand that, but what about other buildings? What would be talking about other buildings here?
Probably the courthouse where they wrongfully held you prisoner and forced you to a trial
Yeah, that
you
would,
didn't want.
Yeah, and also a post office. So we're talking about, this is what the power Congress has. They had the power to dispose of it, and then they have power to make they disposed of it. They had, only other land they had was this 10 square miles, and then they could purchase land from this estate, admitted state. And so this is the question I ask: why would they have to purchase land if they already own it? And then
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
Then the other question I'd like to ask Brett here: how could the state of Nevada or the state of California, how could they sell land to the federal government? How could they sell land to the federal government if they didn't own it?
Well, I'll agree with you.
I mean, that's what the Constitution says. They have to buy it from. So how could the admitted state sell land if they didn't own it? I mean,
That's a good question. I don't know how they could do that. It's bewildering to me.
well,
You raise a good point. Why didn't Gloria get this?
Well, this was
She supposedly graduated from a law school, and she was recommended on Christmas Eve by Harry Reid to President Obama, if Wikipedia is correct. And on May 10th of 2010, she got her judgeship. And I just wonder, how much did anybody figure out, does Gloria really understand the Constitution? I went to law school, and they didn't go into this much depth that Cliven's gone into.
Cliven's clearly a scholar of the Constitution, and a lot of people support him, and we're fortunate to have him, honestly.
I think it's an understatement. We are really fortunate to have one man who stood up and just said, no, and then he said what?
I said, hell no.
Hell no.
Right.
But let me...
I think if Roy Rogers was here, he'd be right behind you.
I think the one thing that is overlooked as well is what a great father is. He's got 7 sons and 7 daughters, and I have to tell you, one of the best parts of being in that trial was getting to know his family and those boys that were with him. He's got some great kids that are just steadfast and true to themselves and true to the Constitution. And at the end of the day, it was a family that came together that prevailed in this case. And you know, he's sitting here by himself, but I think his greatest success is the family that he's raised. He's got some great kids.
I would have to agree with you. Just from the YouTube clips I've seen of some in my interview with your son Ammon, who made an appearance by phone here, I don't know, a year or 2 years ago, right? A couple of months before he got arrested up in the mail hour, which we didn't even discuss yet. We didn't even talk about that. But I think the stand you took, you deserve to have your image, Cliven, chiseled into Mount Rushmore. What would it look like? Cowboy Cliven Bundy, what would it look like? Can you show us that image? Show us the proposed new Mount Rushmore. There it is. There's me, and right above Cliven there, you see, right next to Abe Lincoln, you see Cliven Bundy. I think that's the way Mount Rushmore should look.
Well, you know, it's a real honor that you'd think that. And
I mean, it is, but you did more than that. Two of those presidents there.
You know, I don't put myself in that class at all.
Well, I know you don't. You're a humble man. But
Let me tell you one thing. There's of the group that he's with, and nobody loved America more than Cliven Bundy.
yeah, I would agree. And I don't know why it took Gloria so long to see that.
Well, praise the Lord she did.
Well, I praise the Lord on all things, and that's another thing. I was just amazed at how forgiving your son Ammon was from jail when he made that official Bundy trailer. He was speaking from jail. That Gavin Seam, I guess his name is, produced that well-done job. He produced that thing. Let's just see this. This is official Bundy trailer. And Cliven, his wife told me, just saw it a few days ago. He's been in jail for 700 days and convicted of nothing after multiple trials. Play that. He's using that. Okay.
My name is Ammon Bundy. I am speaking to you today from inside a maximum security jail. I am a son of a Nevada cattle rancher. My father, brothers, and myself have been incarcerated for many months, leaving our wives and 26 children altogether without fathers to care for them. I ask that you listen to our story and judge us. Yes, judge us. Ask yourself if we were justified in standing for our ranch and the rights of our neighbors. Or should we have just let federal agencies take our heritage? Ask yourself, what would have you done? Ask yourself what is right. Let me explain our story. My brothers and I grew up on a family cattle ranch in southern Nevada, established by our great-great-grandfathers in 1877. We were raised in humble circumstances in the same little ranch home as our father, Cliven Bundy, built by my grandfather Dave in the 1940s. For 5 generations, our family has run cattle along the Bunkerville Mountains. Our ancestors were the first pioneers to settle in the southern Nevada desert. They carved their living out of leveling and farming land next to the Virgin River and ran cattle on the hills. Their homesteads were established before Las Vegas had even one person living in it. Nevada had only been a state for 13 years. Discovering multiple springs on the foothills of the mountains, our forefathers began to build water troughs and holding tanks to supply water for cattle. This made it so the cattle did not have to travel too far for water. In the arid desert where a ranch is, it takes approximately 100 acres to feed one cow. In his lifetime, my father has improved upon this watering system by installing pipes throughout the lower hills from 11 different water sources over a 30-mile span. This has allowed the cattle to benefit from feed in areas where otherwise they could not live because they would have to walk too far for water. This has also greatly benefited the desert wildlife and made hunting and camping plentiful. As a true environmentalist, my father, by expanding the water system and caring for the land and the road, has tremendously promoted wildlife, increased game, improved camping, and generally made the area more enjoyable to be on. Even the desert tortoise would thank Cliven Bundy for the water close by if they could speak. All of this is done at my father's expense and effort, costing the taxpayers nothing. With his banged-up Dodge pickup, my father would spend many days a month blowing out the water lines with air and repairing the leaks, making sure each water tank was always full. My family has brought life to the southern Nevada desert for over 100 years. Imagine what would happen to all the wildlife if this watering system was not maintained or if it was destroyed. Before I move on, it is important that you have a little more background about the legality of our water and grazing rights. In 1890, the state of Nevada created a registry so that ranchers and others could deed their water and grazing rights. In Nevada, as with other western states, the livestock water rights include title to graze. Each deed in print designates how many cattle the owner of the deed is typically grazing around the water. This is the way grazing rights are recorded and protected by the state of Nevada. Just to be clear, these livestock grazing and water rights are vested property, much like mineral rights or deeded rights to your home. These grazing rights are real property. They can be sold, traded, borrowed against, or adversely taken. They are the lifeblood of our ranch and are a valued heritage to our family. Many people have desired to purchase them over the years, but my father has chosen to remain raising cattle in the desert. Without these stock water grazing rights, our ranch has almost no value. My father owns 11 of these stock water grazing rights, deeded with the state of Nevada. In the early 1990s, the Bureau of Land Management, also known as the BLM, an agency of the executive branch, tried to trespass my father for grazing cattle on our deeded range, where my family has run cattle for 138 years. The BLM adopted an extreme environmental no cattle policy designed to remove all ranching from the land. On the wall of Southern Nevada BLM district office, they displayed their motto. It read, "No moo by 92, cattle free by 93. Seeing their intent to destroy his ranch, my father stood on the fact that his ranch was inside the boundaries of the state of Nevada, that the federal agencies are violating the constituted laws between the state and the federal government, and that he owns a deeded right to graze and water his cattle, established over a century ago. When agents from the Bureau of Land Management told my father that the federal government does not recognize his grazing rights and that my father must remove his cattle, he told them that they had no authority to take his family's heritage away. When they said they were going to take it away anyway, he said no, and then he said hell no. Several times the Bureau of Land Management tried to drag my father into federal court so they could strip him of his rights, like they have done with thousands of others. Being land inside the state of Nevada, not ceded to the federal government, my father held the constitutional position that federal agencies have no legal constituted authority to administer the land inside the state, and therefore no jurisdiction to trespass or prosecute him. Watching other ranchers, miners, loggers try to defend themselves in federal court when the federal government was the plaintiff, my father often said, going into federal court to defend yourself against federal agencies is like as if a man broke into your home and beat up your wife and children. So to get justice, you take him to court. When they say all arise to the honorable judge, in walks a man in a black robe, and he is the very man that assaulted your wife and children. of over 100,000 cases in the western states where the federal government is the plaintiff in federal court, federal judges have sided with federal agencies every single time, taking century-old vested property rights away from good, hard-working families. In our area, my dad is the last rancher out of 53. In the state of Nevada alone, federal agencies have taken 5,072 water rights from the people and deeded them to themselves. It is astonishing to think about this when the United States Constitution was specifically designed to prohibit this very thing from happening. We, the people, have ignorantly allowed federal agencies of the executive branch to be modern-day conquerors, gobbling up our land and resources and inserting themselves into every facet of our lives. Our homes, our schools, our churches, our jobs, our industries, our manufacturing industries, our housing industries, our agricultural industries, our mineral industries, our financial industries. Everywhere there is wealth, they seek to control and take. They will not stop expanding and growing on their own. They will not limit themselves because they do not produce a product. In order for them to survive and gain and grow, they must take from the people who produce a product. The judicial branch of government, the courts and the judges, have not been an effective check and balance to these agencies for over 60 years, giving them a pass to prey upon the wealth of the American people. U.S. Congress has tried to stop them twice in the last decade by defunding them. We saw through this that the executive agencies are too powerful for even the United States Congress to limit. So how did people come to know about the Bundy family, my family? Well, in April 2014, the BLM joined forces with 4 other federal agencies to enforce their unlawful trespass and destroy our ranch. They set up a massive military-like compound on the range. With 200 hired guns, mercenaries, they surrounded our ranch and put it under siege. They began to brutally round up our cattle with helicopters, running them to death, shooting them from the air, and leaving the newborn cows out on the range to thirst to death or to be eaten by coyotes. The dead cattle were dumped in mass graves dug by federal backhoes. They also began destroying the water infrastructure that had been established over 100 years ago. Our family was threatened by BLM personnel that said, if we resisted in any way, this would be another Waco or Ruby Ridge. Knowing beforehand the abuses that they were about to cause would bring public outcry. The BLM built 2 First Amendment areas in non-conspicuous places and threatened the public with arrest and federal charges if anyone protests outside these areas. Our family, friends, and other local people began to protest first. They insisted not to have their First Amendment rights corralled and refused to protest in these remote, designated areas. With hired snipers on the hills, federal agents began to gang beat protesters for filming their abusive actions. For several days, they body slammed us to the asphalt, sicked dogs on us, tased us, and threatened to open fire on us for protesting on what they said was their property, even standing next to State Highway 170, with guns to our heads and our children's heads. Federal agents said that the road belonged to the state, but the earth under it belonged to them. Much of this abuse was caught on video and was posted on the internet. Within hours, millions had viewed the gross actions of these federal agencies. People from all over the United States began flowing to the ranch. That Saturday, thousands had assembled and demanded the Clark County Sheriff Department and the state governor to do their jobs in protecting the people from out-of-control federal agencies. The Clark County Sheriff's Department finally stepped in and ended the abuse. All federal agents left the area within an hour, and the surviving cattle were brought back to the ranch to be doctored or turned out on the range, and then we went back to ranching. This infuriated the bureaucrats. People such as Harry Reid, who has personally made millions off of land deals with the Bureau of Land Management, publicly came out against our family and the people that stood up to them, calling us domestic terrorists, threatening that this was not over. Many of us wore name tags that read, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, and I'm a domestic terrorist." Great-grandmothers, little children, and everyone in between wore them proudly. Since then, federal agencies have mounted a continual media campaign to demonize my family and those that stood against their horrific actions. In defense, we've had to respond by publishing the truth, My mother, sisters, and many of our friends and family have done the best we could to stop them from controlling the narrative. We knew that if they could change the public sentiment, they would once again justify forceful action against us. In an effort to make sure that this did not happen to any more families in Nevada, in early 2015, my family, along with several state representatives, entered a bill into the Nevada legislature. This bill would end the federal land grabs in the state and force the federal government to follow the Constitution to control land inside the state. Bill AB 408. It was the most publicly supported bill in the Nevada history. Despite its popularity, bureaucrats united together from within and changed the text of the bill right before it was voted on. The new text gave them more power rather than take it away. It was a full array of politics at its finest. On the last day of the House vote, we had to kill our own bill. Hoping that Nevada legislatures would stand up to federal agencies and protect families like ours, we left Carson City with our heads hanging low and went back to ranching, working, and raising children. Before I go on, I need to say that even though our family is suffering great pain and sorrow right now, we do not hate or harbor anger for anyone. We pray daily and diligently for those who have and continue to harm us. We love the Lord Jesus Christ and desire in the end for all of us, even those that have spitefully put us in these jails, to find peace and happiness through his forgiveness and example. Through these great tribulations, we have strived to follow the Lord and do only as he has asked. Now let me go on. Now let me go on. Towards the end of 2015, many became aware of another ranching family in Oregon, the Hammonds, where the father, Dwight, 74, and the son, Stephen, 43, had been put in prison for resisting federal agencies of the executive branch in taking their lands. The abuse to this family over 2 decades is terrible. Federal agencies of the executive branch came together and have taken their water rights, destroyed much of their ranch, restricted use of private property and access to it. Through the courts, they have taken hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines, forced them to sign that they would only sell their ranch to the BLM, and put them in prison the second time for doing maintenance on their ranch without a permit from the Bureau of Land Management. All of this was done inside the state of Oregon on private property or land that federal agencies do not have constituted authority to administrate. These same tactics are being used to take established property rights all over the United States. The EPA, an agency of the executive branch, is using the same playbook in the eastern states. Before federal agencies diminished ranching and destroyed logging in Harney County, where the Hammonds lived, the county had the highest family incomes in the state of Oregon. Now families in Harney County struggle with the lowest incomes in the state. Over the last 30 years, Harney County has consistently declined in incomes, population, and jobs because of the federal government's overtake of the land and resources. The best hope of employment anyone has now in Harney County is working for a federal agency of the executive branch, the BLM, Forest Service, or Fish and Wildlife. Government employment tallies at 58% of Harney County income. This percent does not include those on government assistance. Together, approximately 70% of Harney County residents depend on the government for their living. The remaining minority, the producers, are choking from forceful regulation and live in fear of retaliation if they speak out. Those that do speak and live in fear of retaliation if they speak out. Those that do speak out.
That was your son Ammon there, right?
Yeah, and I want to make a comment on this. Ammon was in prison when he made this recording. I don't know exactly who put the video together, but the audio, he was talking on a telephone that they had slid under his cell, and he was in confinement. Confinement in the prison, we call it the hole. That's like being in jail. And I'm not so sure Ammon at this point was naked. They had him naked in there and cold, and he did this performance on over the telephone.
Amazing that our government would make someone sit naked in a cell just as extra punishment.
It's not
He hadn't been convicted of it. In fact, he's still not convicted of anything.
No, and it's not only naked, it's cold.
Yeah, I understand. I understand being in a cold jail. I get that.
You understand that? Well,
I do. Talk about that later. But yeah, that was extra torture. And I'd like to get Ammon and Ryan both out here. And you had two other sons your wife Carol said were locked up for a while.
Well, it was 4 sons and myself that was locked up for almost 2 years.
700 days for you, and Ammon was already under arrest when they picked you up at the port.
He had been in there for a couple of weeks before I got there.
And now you flew up to Portland to support them at the Malauer Preserve, and as soon as you got off the airport, off the plane, what happened?
Well, before I even got off the plane, they had me earmarked, I guess. Before I even stepped out of the airplane door, they had got a hold of me, handcuffed me, took me down another stairs off onto the ground, and that's where they arrested me. And so...
You hadn't done anything up there?
No, I hadn't done anything. I hadn't even got on the ground. I didn't even got out of the airplane.
And then you had to stand trial in Oregon, right?
No, they moved me to Nevada. They never did indict me in Oregon.
So you weren't with the defendants of Shauna Cox and Ammon and Ryan in the Oregon trial?
No.
They just kept you locked up all that time?
Yeah, I was locked up all that time, but I wasn't involved in that. Yeah.
Wow. At the time you were arrested on that plane, was your son already in custody?
Yes. 2 of them were. Then they picked up the other 2, I don't know, a couple of weeks later or whatever, I'm not sure exactly time. My son, Mel, he was working in southern Arizona, putting building sprinklers and putting the sprinkler systems together. And my son, Dave, was in Utah, Delta, Utah, working on his house. And both times, they brought a big, heavy SWAT team and arrested those guys just like they were the dangerousest people in the world.
Wow. That's just amazing how brutal they can be. For your crime, Cliven, was raising cattle, which thousands and thousands of farmers and ranchers across this country raise cattle. And you had established grazing rights. I want to point out, in case you missed it, Mr. Bundy, seated here between me and his attorney in the last trial, Mr. Bundy was never convicted of anything, not even a misdemeanor, in spite of 700 days locked up because the BLM had plans to kill the Bundys. And we didn't find that out, that there was a, quote, kill list until the trial was almost over, right? Or it didn't even get into the court record, Mr. Whipple?
Well, we were about 2.5 months into the trial, but the trial stopped and started and then stopped several times. We had a number of evidentiary hearings prior to the trial. It took a couple, 3 days, 4 days to pick a jury. I think they only got 4 witnesses into the actual trial when they actually called a stop to it.
You only got 4 of your witnesses in?
No. Their witnesses.
Their witnesses.
But the witnesses were lengthy witnesses. They were on the stand for a couple of days apiece on several of them.
Which one was it? Wooten that spilled the beans about Dan Love's kill list?
So Mr. Wooten was an investigator for the Bureau of Land Management after the fact. He was the one that was the lead investigator to come in and make a determination as to what wrongdoing potentially occurred at the standoff. He ended up flipping during the trial and writing essentially the defense a letter outlining all these horrible things that had occurred when he was part of the investigative team for the Bureau of Land Management.
Wow. So he just grew a conscience during the trial, you think? Or?
Well, we never spoke to him. We just got the letter as part of discovery in the middle of the trial. Lo and behold, we're sitting there one morning and we get this letter with all these horrible things that allegedly were taking place on the other side that we knew nothing about.
When did you tell Cliven about that?
Cliven knew within 24 hours as soon as he was in custody, so the next morning we were able to disclose it to him.
Did you say, thank you, God?
At that point, to be honest with you, it was already heading south. We already knew that we were going to be in a position to get the case dismissed, because at the end of the day, the Wooten letter wasn't even part of the dismissal.
Wow, so that never got on the record yet.
Yeah, that's true. It's still never been on the. It still has.
That's still not on the record yet.
We had actually, Cliven and myself had filed a motion to dismiss on that issue alone, but the ruling was actually with regard to the SWAT teams that the government refused to disclose, the cameras that the government's refused to disclose, all the issues that they had misled us about even before we got to the Wooten letter is what the case is dismissed on.
Wow. So this is breaking news that Wooten wrote this letter.
Yeah.
Didn't get in. This isn't why they dismissed it with prejudice. But Cliven, you told me over the phone you would have rather let the jury go ahead and decide.
Well, yeah, I would have liked to seen this case go on and have the jury acquit me, because that would have set a precedent. So right now, what happened is basically they just dismissed it. There were no guilty or innocent declared by a jury. If we'd had a jury actually continued here and found us all innocent, it would set precedents. And what really happens now is they, in my way of thinking, they saved the federal people a lot of embarrassment.
Yeah.
And they just basically put me back where I was 25 years ago with a court order against me.
Would you sum it up the same way, Mr. Whipple?
Well, a win's a win, and at the end of the day, we won, and Cliven is free, and that's the most important thing. At the end of the day, he's also taken a real leadership position regarding state rights, and I'm glad that he's here, and I'm glad to be part of it.
Well, I'm glad you took your position. I'm glad I'm still alive to do this television show, Cliven. Though I know there's a few county DAs would wish I wasn't alive anymore, but too bad. Michael was actually really innocent, and you guys should have prosecuted your own prosecutor, Tom Sneddon. Should Prosecutor Steve, what's that last name?
Mr.
Myrie, I don't like to say dirty words on television, Mr. Whipple. That's why I didn't say it, but I'll let you say it. Should he be indicted? For the Brady violations?
That's not my position, honestly.
No, but looking as an American citizen that believes in the Constitution, should the prosecutors be indicted for their felony Brady violations?
I'm not going to go there. I don't have all the facts. I just know there were a lot of stuff that went on that should never have gone on, and that's why the judge dismissed it. You know, if they'd fought fair from the beginning, we wouldn't even be here. I think they owe a huge apology to Cliven Bundy for taking away 2 years, 700 days of his independence. But
what is that worth in a lawsuit? Give me a guesstimate.
Well, that's up to Cliven. Again, I work for Cliven, and that's a decision that he'll make at some point. But, you know, he's now a leader for states' rights, and people look at him for leadership. And I think the issue is much more important than Cliven himself, and that is the fact that the issue of all these lands should belong to the people who utilize it.
Well, I think Cliven has made that case. Unfortunately, the Hammonds, whose name are Stephen and Dwight, right?
Right.
We think they're still sitting in jail years. They're from Oregon, and that's what your two sons went up to bring attention. This is the amazing Bundy family, if you haven't caught on. Cliven's two sons, Amon, who appeared here once by phone, and Ryan, who I've never met, went up to Oregon, right, to bring attention that these two guys, the Hammonds, should not be even prosecuted. This is the Uranium One Agenda 21 swindle that goes back to Hillary Clinton and a whole bunch of scumbags that we don't have time to list because we've only got 3 minutes left. Please write Dwayne Elmer a letter. He's sitting in Lompoc prison, less than 25 miles from here, probably less than 20 miles from here. We'll show you his address again. Write him a letter. All he did to get thrown into jail is dig a ditch so Amon and Ryan and the militia in Oregon could drop into a hole and dodge bullets that they were told were also known as the FBI and the BLM and so on. They just wanted to have a place, and so Dwayne Leo Elmer did a trench so they'd have something to drop in and dodge the incoming bullets. Luckily, no bullets were fired against them. However, a guy named Finicum, Lavoy Finicum, was murdered. Would you call that cold-blooded murder, Cliven?
Yes, it was cold-blooded murder.
Would you call that cold-blooded murder?
I think the picture stands for itself. It's all on video. I don't have to make that decision. The American people can make that decision. It's all videotaped.
So,
I'd like, where we're about out of time, I'd like to thank Brett Whipple for coming. I want to thank him for being my attorney. he did a good job. He stood against some real bad odds. And I want to thank him for coming here with us tonight, and I appreciate it, Brett.
Thanks, Cliven, of course. Always here for you.
you guys out there in TV land, you can applaud now. We might hear you. You can applaud now. We're down to 1 minute and breakaway. And we hope to get Ryan and and Ryan Bundy out here. I'm William Wagener, putting my cowboy Bundy hat on and thanking you all for tuning in tonight. It's been a real experience interviewing this man seated next to me and his attorney. And his wife, Carol, is really delightful. And she mentioned, by the way, that after the jury was dismissed, 8 of them came back and sat with Carol Bundy, his wife, to hear the rest of the trial because they weren't sitting in the jury box anymore. 8 of them came back. What does that tell you? If 8 of the 12 jurors came and sat with his wife, I think Cliven was right. They would have found him not guilty with prejudice. The sad thing is they don't have the right to indict the prosecutors, and I think a jury should have that right. I'm William Wagener saying thanks for tuning in. The sad thing is they don't have the right to indict the prosecutors, and I think a jury should. The sad thing is they don't have the right to indict the prosecutors, and I think a jury should. I'm William Wagener saying thanks for tuning in. The sad thing is they don't have the right to indict the prosecutors, and I think a jury should. The sad thing is they don't have the right to indict the prosecutors, and I think a jury should. The sad thing is they don't have the right to indict the prosecutors, and I think a jury should. The sad thing is they don't have the right to indict the prosecutors, and I think a jury should. The sad thing is they don't have the right to indict the prosecutors, and I think a jury should. The sad thing is they don't have the right to indict the prosecutors, and I think a jury should. The sad thing is they don't have the right to indict the prosecutors, and I think a jury should. The sad thing is they don't have the right to indict the prosecutors, and I think a jury should. The sad thing is they don't have the right to indict the prosecutors, and I think a jury should. The sad thing is they don't have the right to indict the prosecutors, and I think a jury should. The sad thing is they don't have the right to indict the prosecutors, and I think a jury should. The Good night, people. The sad thing is they don't have the right to indict the prosecutors, and I think a jury should.